Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming out. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Have you ever thought to yourself that maybe your communication is less than effective? Has anyone thought that? Raise your hand. Okay, good. I'm not alone. I've thought that as well. And it's pretty interesting. John Maxwell once said, everyone communicates, but very few of us actually connect. And I found that to be true in my life. You know, especially now that we have so many different devices, it's just so easy to communicate with people. We can communicate with people all the way across the world. But are we really connecting with them? Is our communication really effective? Is there a purpose behind our communication? Do you remember this time? Do you remember the time when it was so easy to communicate? All you needed was 2 cans and a string? Do you remember that? Oh my gosh, I loved that. It was so fun. I think now our communication has gotten a little bit more cumbersome, a little bit more difficult, a little bit more high-tech, if you will. Correct? It makes it even easier than communicating with 2 cans. But are we really being more effective? Do we really have purpose behind our communication? There's a few barriers. I like the first one, lack of focus. Why do you think we have a lack of focus? We're busy doing this, right? Have you ever had tried to have a conversation with someone and they're sitting right in front of you and they keep doing this? Have you ever had that happen? So what do? You turn around and you want to look and see what they're looking at, right? It's lack of focus, okay? Sometimes we check our phones when people are talking with us. Have you ever been to a restaurant or to another place of business and you're going there to get some help? Maybe you're at a customer service desk, right? And when you get there, it's your turn and you step up to the desk and you're talking to the person that's helping you out, to the customer service rep, and you're telling them, hey, I want to return this. And the phone rings. And they look at you and say, hang on a minute. And they pick up the phone. Why is it that we have gotten to the point in our society where we feel like the phone call is more important than the person standing right in front of us? Lack of focus. Body language. Have you been to this one? You're talking to somebody, you think you're having a great conversation, and then all of a sudden they surprise you and they do this. Is that very inviting? Does that say, communicate with me? Does that say, I really want to hear what you have to say? What you have to say? What you have to say? Know your audience. This is one of my favorite ones. Is our communication appropriate for the audience we're communicating with? You know, I've been married 28 years last month. Go ahead, you can clap. I'll let you clap. It's great for me, not so great for my wife, because she has to deal with me, right? I'll tell you what, the first few years of our marriage were really difficult because we didn't know how to communicate effectively with one another. You see, my wife is the type that she wants the backstory to the backstory to that backstory. I've learned over the years that if I'm going to come home and tell my wife a story, if I'm going to say, hey, sweetheart, guess what? This happened at work today, I'd better be prepared not for 20 questions, probably 150 questions. And I better have the backstory to all of those questions, to all those answers. Right? Do you know anybody like that? It can be extremely difficult to communicate with those people if you're not communicating the way that they want to be communicated to. So know your audience. So now, if I come home and tell my wife a story, I give her all the information, every piece of information that I can think of regarding that story. Because now I know that she is fulfilled. She is intently listening to my story because she knows that I'm going to communicate that story the way she wants to be communicated to. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, now on the flip side, I am not that way at all. Okay? And in fact, my wife, she can attest to this. She'll get mad at me because she'll start telling me a story. And how do you think she starts talking about telling a story? Yeah, she's giving me all the details. Oh. Right? Give me a break. I want the ESPN version, right, guys and ladies, right? I want the highlights. Listen, I am so busy nowadays that I don't really have time to sit down and watch an entire football game or an entire basketball game. Because a football game can go 4.5 hours, a basketball game easily an hour and a half to 2 hours. Who has that time anymore? I know I don't. So I just want the highlights. That's why I turn on ESPN, because they'll say, this is the game that happened. These are the two teams that played. This is who scored. This is who won. This is who lost. That's all I need to know. Thank you very much. So that's what I want to hear from my wife. That's the kind of story I want. Just give me the highlights, babe, right? And then if I have any questions, I'll ask you. But just give me the highlights. So it's critically important that we actually know our audience. How do they like to be communicated to? I will make you a promise. If you can figure out how your manager, how your boss, how your coworker, how your kids, how your spouse, your parents, if you can figure out how they want to be communicated to and you start communicating with them in that manner, I promise you that your communication with those people will be 10 times fold. It'll just be greater. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, excellent. Listen to understand. How many times do we start talking and instead of listening, we interrupt them because we want them to hear our point of view. I have a solution, right? This is especially cumbersome or problematic to guys because guys are wired in such a way that we want to fix problems, right? We're the fixers, except for maybe my wife and I in our relationship because she's the one that fixes the dishwasher. But at least I like to pretend that I can fix stuff, right? And so when she tells me something, I want to jump right in and fix it. I'm not listening to understand. I'm listening to solve a problem, even if it doesn't need solving. So really listen intently. Listen to understand to what the other person is saying. Okay, the last one, stress and out of control emotions. Whenever we are stressed, whenever we are highly emotional, we are not going to be effective communicators. Whether that's verbal, nonverbal, in an email, on a text, you name it, we will not be very effective as communicators. Raise your hand if you've ever received a text or an email and it made you mad. Anybody? Okay, I'm going to raise both hands because that's me, right? I'm Hispanic, right? My dad put panic in Hispanic. I get highly emotional, okay? So that happens to me. But what happens if I let those emotions just stay up at a high level and I try to answer that text or that email while I'm highly emotional? What do you think happens? Yeah, you're correct. Nothing good comes of it because I'm highly emotional. Those emotions are at the surface. So when you feel a little bit stressed out, when you feel highly emotional, just back up a little bit. Take it down to second gear. Have a minute to think about what your response should be. And your communication will be more effective. Okay, I want to share with you my 3 C's to be an effective communicator. Number 1, be clear. If you can explain your story to a 6-year-old, then your story makes sense. See, sometimes we start thinking, okay, I got this great story or I have this information to share with someone, and we just start sharing it. Because in our mind, it makes sense, right? But the other person receiving that message is sitting there looking at us like a deer in the headlights going, what are they talking about? I have no idea what you just said. What? What do I do with all this information? I have no idea. Okay? So if you can explain it to a 6-year-old, then you're good to go. It takes me back to when I wrote my first book. When I wrote my first book, I sent it to an editor. And I was pretty proud of myself. I was thinking, I did a really good job. She mailed back a physical copy because I just attached it email because I'm kind of lazy, So I sent it off to her electronically. She mails it back to me. When I opened it up and I started thumbing through it, scanning through it, I thought that the document was bleeding to death, right? Because there were so many corrections all in red. Because it made total sense in my mind. But when she was reading it, not so much. So make sure your communication is very, very clear. Like I said, if a little child can understand it, you're good. Okay? Make sense? Okay, excellent. The next one is be complete in your communication. No is a complete sentence. Okay? So when you're communicating with someone, don't leave vital information out. This happened to me a few years ago. I'm up on stage. I'm telling this fantastic story. Everyone's highly emotional. I got people in the audience crying. I've got people laughing. And I thought I was going to pat myself on the back as I walked off the stage. Only to have people come to me afterwards and say, so what was the ending? Like, what happened? And then it dawned on me, oh my gosh, I got so wrapped up in my story, in the information that I wanted to share with people, that I wasn't complete. I left them hanging. Is there anything more annoying than that? I mean, imagine your favorite movie, and don't you hate it when it says to be continued? Don't you hate it when you know there's going to be a part B, right? A second version of it? It's highly annoying. So make sure that you're complete in your communication. Okay? It'll make it very effective. Now, the last one is be concise. A story should be just like a roller coaster, not a train track. We all know somebody like that, right? We all know that person that they start telling us a joke and they never get to the punchline. They start telling a story and you can go to the bathroom. You can go comb your hair, take a shower. You can go feed the dog. You can go walk the dog. And you can come back, and guess what? They're still telling a story. Right? Be concise. Be like Carl. I think Karl Malone once said, don't beat a dead horse to death. Right? In other words, get to the point. Make your point. Make it once and move on. Thanks, guys. Thank you.